We're going to go ahead and call the Senate Education and Youth Committee to order. Senator Steele, if you would lead us in a prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful afternoon. Thank you for so many people interested in the future of all the children in the great state of Georgia. Father God, please be with everything that we're talking about today for the betterment of these kids and these families. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We're running on a tight clock. We had rules that ran over, and we've had a couple of committees before this that ran over, so we're on an hour. We've got regulated industries that will have this room at 4:30. So I'm going to run a tight schedule on speakers. We're going to keep it at 2 minutes. We've got 4 bills. I anticipated having an hour and a half, so if one of the bills we don't get finished with, we'll move it to tomorrow's agenda at 10 a.m., just to let everybody know that. But our first bill that we're hearing today is Senate Bill 211 by Senator Hickman.
I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This probably, in my opinion, is probably maybe one of the most significant bills that we've listened to in a long time, and this is not only a current bill, this is a life-changing bill. This is a generational changing bill. So I'm very excited and excited to be here and very important. You know, as I've said so many times, we don't have a literacy problem in Georgia, and across the United States we got an illiteracy problem, and it's really an epidemic. First of all, I would like to thank Senator Dixon and the Education Committee meeting for the 4 joint meetings that we had with the Higher Education Committee. I think we learned a lot. We heard a lot of great things. We heard from a cross-section of presenters, and I think it really helped solidify what we got in this bill and bring it to light. As I've told y'all many times, I personally met with Joy Hawkins and 58 school superintendents across Georgia in the last 8 to 10 months. And we still, everywhere we went, the literacy rates were low. Average literacy rate, according to GOSA, third grade in Georgia reading is 43.59%, and we can't get away from that rate. We can say it's 53%. Well, that's still not good enough for us. We want our children to be able to read, just like our Republican caucus identified one of the top priorities for our session as creating an educated workforce, and that's extremely important to all of us, extremely important to the success of our state and country. We have patterned this bill, Mr. Chairman, after Governor Deal's criminal justice reform bill and Speaker Rawlston's mental health commission bill, and we'll get into that in just a second. I want to share this with you because I think it will again reiterate the seriousness of this situation. I met with the mayor of Savannah back about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about the Hyundai plan. We were talking about what a great opportunities we have for our part of the world to upgrade the standard of living and decrease poverty by these jobs now. And I asked him, I said, Mayor, do you realize in Chatham County, you've got 5 F-rated school systems in Chatham County? And he said, no, sir, I didn't know that. And so we got to talk a little bit further. And I said, well, we're working on this literacy bill and all. And I said, are you aware of what the literacy rate in your area is? And he said, yes, sir, I am. And of course, I imagine, I just had in my mind it was going to be some number that I would not agree with. And I said, well, Mayor, what is it? He said, Senator, it's 22%. Our children, third grade level school system in Chatham County, only 22% of the children are reading on third grade level, according to the mayor of Savannah. You know, that's pretty unacceptable, and that's where we're at today. What we found out is the graduation rates, you know.
Mr. Chairman, let me interrupt you. We're going to have to keep it tight. I apologize.
Okay,
and I'm excited about this commission, but we got 1 minute.
Okay. 1 minute?
Yes.
I can't say good morning in 1 minute. Well, what we've done, we created, our bill, it's Senate Bill 211, LC 49-1370S. We created a Georgia Council on Literacy. And as I've said so many times, we didn't get here overnight and we won't be corrected overnight. But this is a council that will be funded by people selected by the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and it will be a cross-section. Department of Education will be a big part in it. DECAL will be a big part in it. Board of Regents, TSCG, and we will have joint meetings, and we're going to address the top 4 priorities that we're going to be looking at is pre-K and K. We're going to be looking looking at some type of a way to really determine what the real test scores are at 3, 5, and 8th grade level, so we can really tell how well our children are doing. We're going to be looking at whether teachers are being taught how to read in school, are they being taught how to teach children how to read? And the fourth thing, probably the biggest thing, is community involvement. We've got to let our communities know that our children can't read, and that's a big part of it. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over. That's a quick deal. I got a lot more information. I would first of all, but I would like to say, Senator Ulrich, I think she may be listening online. I want to thank her for continuing to ask about English as a second language students and economically disadvantaged. We're asking the council to make recommendations on line 111 through 114. And then Senator Parent and I have talked many times about dyslexia. We've in our school system, 22% of our children experience some form of dyslexia, and that's addressed in line 115 and 116. I will entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to commend you on your efforts on literacy. You have been the pioneer in the Senate. You've been working on this all year, and I commend you.
Well, thank you.
And Irene as well. I tell you,
yeah.
she is a rock star.
My right arm.
In the education world, and especially in the literacy world. I tell you, it's the foundation of education, and we've seen that in the meetings that we've been in,
Correct.
where we get literacy right and we get kids reading proficient in the 3rd grade. That's the building block and the foundation to set them up for success later on, and I'm grateful for everything that
Thank
you're
you,
doing.
sir. Thank you.
And with that, we got any questions from the committee?
I just want to make a motion, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move do pass LC 49-1370S.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second.
Wow.
A double second. Too close to call who came in on that one, but everyone in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? Passes unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, y'all gonna really make me sleep good tonight. Thank you.
And I figured out how to make you a speed reader,
That's what it is. Thank you.
or presenter, I guess, rather. Now we're going to move on. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I want to make sure we get through this bill today. We're going to hear SB 233.
You ready for me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, if Jamie Lord can join me up here, and she has been working alongside me for a number of years on bills like these
Absolutely.
as we have endeavored to increase parental choice here in the state of Georgia. For those of you that have been on the Education Committee or really in the Senate for the last 2, 4, or more years, you have seen bills very similar to Senate Bill 233. Senate Bill 233, essentially to take the vernacular as it's become known in the political world, is a money follows the child bill. What does that mean? There's 3 buckets of funding for public education, Mr. Chairman, as you know, state, local, and federal. And what this bill ultimately does is has a prescribed amount of state funding that will follow the child into a educational opportunity of the parent's choice. That funding amount is $6,000 in this bill. The way that we derived the $6,000 is we essentially took an average of the QBE formula and discounted it by about 10% to ensure that this number on aggregate as the student makes their way through the system actually requires less state funding than if they were to remain in the public school. In order to be eligible, with the exception of students entering kindergarten, in order to be eligible for this program, students will have to have registered a full-time equivalent, in other words, triggered the QBE funding from the state in the public school. Therefore, for students whose parents choose to have them go down the path of exercising these promised scholarships that are described in this bill, the state funding is less, and then of course the local funding stays in the system. We have annualized testing as part of this bill, which is kind of an enhancement since the first time I carried this as a freshman. Those test scores will be made public on an annual basis. The reason I point that out is public school does not have annual testing. So we actually have more robust testing and more robust reporting as it relates to the test scores, I think, than any of these bills have had than we've seen previously, as well as obviously above and beyond that with public school currently has. A couple other highlights for this bill, Mr. Chairman. Essentially, I want to zoom out for a second and talk about the way that the funding works, because there's a lot of, I'm not going to say misinformation, but there's a lot of confusion. And if you think of an FSA account or even a health savings account, it's very similar to that. With the exception there's no direct reimbursement. So essentially, the state funds a third-party administrated account with the $6,000. The parents never touch the money. The parents submit their check request, if you will, or their ACH request. It has to follow, it has to be part of the allotted expenses that are allowed in the bill. And then the agency, the third-party administrator would cut the check. So there's been a lot of concern about what happens with the money. Are we just handing money off to people? And that's not the case. If those funds are not used after a certain period of time, they're refunded to the state general fund. You do have a committee sub in front of you. The committee sub does two things I want to highlight for the committee. First of all, it states that the funding for this program will be frozen unless QBE is fully funded. So if we do not fully fund QBE next year, not one single student will enter into this program. And then secondly, the other thing that we did in here, that an earlier version of this bill essentially had funding that followed the student through their post-graduate or post-K through 12 education. At the end of the time where the student obtains a high school diploma, that funding, the funds, if there are any funds available, get refunded back to the state general fund. And then lastly, we eliminated an approved allotment for uses on technology, specifically laptops and computers that were in a previous version of this bill. Mr. Chairman, I know bills like these are no stranger to this committee, so rather than opine on and on about them, I'm happy to either answer any questions, or I know there's a number of people here that would like to speak as well, and happy to hear testimony.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
11. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. So question, you said it's the average of QBE discounted, did you say 10 or 15%?
It's approximately 10%. So QBE is a little bit over $6,500 if you take the gross aggregate of our spending divided by the amount of students in the system.
So do you know what the state funding is for a kindergartner?
It depends on the kindergartner. It depends on.
Well, just the average non-special needs.
I don't.
Okay, and what about a
I
high
can
school
get that for
senior?
you. Again, we didn't break this down specifically. We had this in previous versions of this bill. We actually had it tied directly to QBE funding. In other words, the type of, whether it's kindergarten, high school, or et cetera. As you know, those vary based on what type of head count, if you will, we're putting on that student.
So would it lock, I remember prior versions of the bill, it locked in at the age that the child started to accept the money regardless of like what the funding would have been for that particular child as they went through education, because as I think you'll agree with me, like the kindergartners are more expensive than the seniors. What does this bill do
This
with
bill's
regard to that?
it's a straight $6,000 per year.
So it locks in no matter what?
It's a flat fee regardless of when they enter and when they leave. So if you enter in first grade, it's $6,000. If you enter in the 11th grade, it's $6,000. I don't know that my previous versions of the bills locked in necessarily, but they were more tied to the specific QBE allotment. And that tended to get very confusing to parents as far as what the amount was going to be. And so this makes it very clear. And
Let me ask one more question. Thank you,
Sure.
so it locks in,
Yeah.
okay. Let me ask one more question, which I guess is, I mean, it is a little bit of a philosophical thing, but I do think it needs raising. What year was QBE put into place?
yeah, I believe the QBE is almost 40 years old. It's a little bit younger than me.
Do you have a high level of confidence that that's the proper metric that we should be using to lock in funds to be leaving the system?
I'm sure that QBE can and will be massaged. I know there's been study committees that have taken a look at that. I don't think, though, that when we shift it, I don't think that it's going to shift significantly. And at that time, we obviously can amend this bill to reflect that, and I'd be open to that.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee?
Thank you. Here's my question. And I do have concerns also about that $6,000 number as an average. But let's just assume for a second that we go with that. My question is really more about the fiscal impact to the state. I believe we have something right now like 100,000 students or so who are in private schools. If we were to impart this $6,000, even if you just multiply it by the 100,000 people who are currently in private school, that's a $600 million impact. And for me, I'm somebody, I've got a child in public school and I've got a child in private school. But if you were to open this up, and I'm paying for both, I'm paying for that. If you were to open this up and basically say, hey, every taxpayer, you've already basically put money into the system, you now get to take out. I do think that we need to recognize that there will be quite a number of families who currently are paying for private school for their children, who will now take their $6,000 allotment that they have contributed into the system and plan to use it themselves to offset those costs.
They would probably love to do that, but the bill does not allow them to do that. So in order to have access to the $6,000, and I may have not explained this clearly, I apologize to the senator, but you have to have registered a QBE in the prior year. So for your child who is not in, for your child who is in private school, they would not have access to the funding. For your child who is currently in public school, should this pass and should you choose that the better education outcome for them is in a school outside of the public school, they would have access to that funding.
Then just to follow up.
And if I,
Go ahead.
And as a reminder, I think this is important. If that student chooses to stay in public school, most likely it's going to cost the state more money than if they were to take this ESA.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Okay.
But, so if I have, so my first grader is in public school currently.
Mm-hmm.
Next year, you're saying, if I wanted to put her in private school, I could and I could draw down these monies. So then the question is, for how many years is there, so then from here on out, she can just be in private school and then I would get my $6,000 a year?
Correct. And for here on out, she also could stay in public school and the state the cost would actually be higher. There was a study done by Jeffrey Dorfman. I know that we all know Dr. Dorfman from his work now with the state. But Dr. Dorfman looked at all 181 school systems in the state of Georgia, and I believe it was 2018. And he basically looked at the concept of variable cost. What is the cost to add one student to the system? And he compared that variable cost to the state funding. And so essentially, if the variable cost is higher than the state funding in a system, there's actually more money per capita that remains in the system in those counties, or those school systems. Obviously, we have city school systems as well. I reviewed that study today of the 181 systems. 176 actually will have their per capita amount of funding increase because the local money stays in that district under a program like this with the $6,000 number.
Thank you.
You got Senator Steele?
Senator Sims?
Still,
Yes, oh, I thought Senator Steele had a question. No, Senator Sims?
I wanted to go back to the statement on testing. Tell me what you just stated in your,
So we're going to allow them, and I'm going to try to find the bill line, the line numbers here so you can just see it for yourself as well. It's towards the end of the bill, and Jamie, help me out if you see it. All right, here we go. It's starts at lines 241. The commission shall develop a process for the annual administration of a nationally norm reference test or statewide assessment and the collection of results. And then the bill goes on to state that we're going to basically give the option of 3 tests to take. All students in the system take that test on an annual basis. All of that information gets reported back to the state, and the state makes that information available to the public. So I have currently children in 5th, 3rd, and kindergarten in public school. I believe one of them will be tested this year. Under this bill, if all of them were to go to private school, they would be tested every year.
were we not the one, did the legislature, at some point in time waive the number of tests or insisted that we were doing too much testing.
It was actually, I remember, 'cause it was my freshman year in the Senate, and we did pull
And,
back.
So the state was the one that decided that there was too much testing going on,
Correct.
okay?
But opponents of this bill, in an attempt to assuage the opponents of this bill, it's like whack-a-mole, Senator. So there's new objections that are raised, and we address those concerns, and there's a new objection and a new objection. However, that being said, in a good faith effort to address the testing and call it transparency concerns, we insert this language into the bill.
My feelings about transparency is around the funding and the money, more so than the academic results. So how do we address the accountability? Are we going to, we're sending them to the dollars with the children? Are we going to make comparisons between the public and the private schools? Who does the better job? And are we going to be able to do that, to
Well,
assess, to make those assessments?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I know for me, if I'm acutely aware of and my wife is as well, perhaps even more than me, acutely aware of my child's education status, how they're doing in school. I'm acutely aware of how our school compares to the
No,
school
that's not what I'm
across town.
saying. If these,
I think I'm getting to it, though. But go ahead, restate it.
okay, if we're trying to find the best method for educating children, not just yours, not
Yep.
just mine, but anybody's in the state of Georgia, are we going to, what kind of assessments are we going to do? Is that written in your bill to assess the programming that you're describing to us?
Are you asking me about some sort of assessment outside of the testing
No,
that we're referencing?
no. Well, I guess it could be either way. It could be an internal testing program, or it could be external. But as long as the public understands, because no matter what happens, as a legislator, me, one person, I feel responsible for the education of every child, not just the children in District 12, but every child in this state, and especially those that are in public schools. Now, having said that, there are parents that said, we don't want you to have anything to do with the education of our children, and we understand that. I don't have a problem with that. But for those that cannot say that are not in a position financially and otherwise, I want to be able to do the very best that I can as a legislator to make sure that those children are educated with quality.
I agree 1,000%, and thank you for sharing that. Jamie, I'm going to let her speak to this, but she just referenced lines 257 and 258. And I'm also going to ask Jamie to speak to what we've seen in other states that have adopted programs like these as it relates to that, and some of the outcomes that we've seen there as well.
Thank you so much. I'm primarily here for moral and technical support, but I'm thrilled to be supportive of the bill.
Would you state your name?
Yes, Jamie Lord, and I am here today on behalf of Georgia Center for Opportunity. So there are currently 10 states at least that have these types of programs. New ones seem to be passing every day and every minute, so it's possible there are more, and I've missed it in the last half hour. I think that last count, there are about 35 to 37 active education savings accounts or promise scholarship type bills in the country moving through state legislatures that are in session. So while this may be a bit novel to Georgia, not novel to many of you who've been in the Senate or in the legislature for the past number of years, it's not necessarily a new idea nationally. So yes, this bill does require national norm reference testing of every participating student, whether they're in private school or some other program, be it a homeschool or a hybrid or a virtual school. Those results are made public to the legislature and the public, including year-over-year gains, graduation rates, et cetera. So there is an attempt in this bill to make sure that for everybody participating in this program, that we can track academic progress as a measure of public accountability to the taxpayer. And as Senator Dolezal mentioned, I mean, things get a little bit specific when you talk about testing in public school, because certainly prior to, I think, third, I don't think we're doing that yearly Then there's a period at which we test yearly, and then in high school, it depends on the subject and the grade and all of that. So I would argue that in some ways, we're doing more for kids in this program in terms of testing, depending on exactly the grade we're talking about, and making all of that public. So there can be some sort of comparison. As we all know, an individual student, measuring their gains over time might be more important than just how is that one student comparing with this other student over here in a completely different setting. But we want to make sure that they're making progress. And we can, to some extent, track progress with our current public school testing and see if, things are on par with those same students in this other program. But that is the goal, is to provide public and transparent academic accountability in addition to the financial and fiscal accountability that's built into this bill as well.
Thank you. Senator Eccles?
Thank you. A question about the funding. So the $6,000 per student goes to a third party that's holding the money and dispersing the money. I'm sure they're not doing that for free, so who's paying for that?
Yeah, we allot for it in the bill 5%, up to a 5% fee.
Okay.
And we cap that in the bill because obviously we do not want this to be a profit center for any
Correct.
entity.
I couldn't find it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have some friends of the family, their kids went to a noted high-performing school and actually did very poorly. It was sort of a whole chain of events that happened to some bad life decisions, and it was really a disaster for the child. And there's other kids who struggle greatly in schools that otherwise seem to be performing okay, but it's just really not a fit for them. Is there anything in this bill that would limit which schools kids go to as getting the scholarship, or does any kid in any school have access to this?
Do you want to talk about the?
Any student who is currently enrolled and attending a public school would have access. It doesn't limit by the public school performance, understanding
Because
that.
I'm very concerned there's so many needs for kids, even in schools that are otherwise, quote, decently performing schools, that's a terrible fit for them. Whether it's bullying, whether it's a whole array of issues that could be there. I'd like to thank you for not having, carving out these schools get access to this and these others don't, because in many cases, otherwise decently performing schools are terrible fits for one kid or another. They live in a community where their kid needs specialized help. Their local school is, quote, a decent performing school in test scores, but it doesn't meet the kids' needs or their IEP. I just appreciate that.
Thank you.
Senator, I got called to the ropes on Dyslexia Day. I met a family. I'd never met them before. Didn't know why I was at the ropes with them, other than for them to advocate for their daughter. But they live in my district. As you know, we have excellent schools in my system. And to your point, she's in another school that teaches Orton Gillingham. And this family would not, unfortunately, qualify for this program because of the QBE qualification. But they told me how they're living in a two-bedroom apartment, sharing one car that has 120,000 miles on it. I think they said to get her into the $30,000 a year school that met her needs. And it further affirmed for me what you're saying, and that is that even in the best of the best, public education is not one size fits all.
Thank you. We're going to hear from some of the folks that signed up to speak. The first person we've got, Buzz Brockway, if you're in the room.
Mr. Chairman, I was the last to sign up, and so I thought I'd be the last to speak. But thank you for your time. I know you have a lot of people here to speak. Again, my name is Buzz Brockway. I'm with the Georgia Center for Opportunity, and I appreciate Senator Dolezal bringing this bill. And I just want to point out to you, you heard Senator Hickman here earlier talking about schools receiving poor grades. Currently, there.
Let me interrupt you real quick. We're going to keep it
Yes,
all
sir.
at 1 minute because I've
Yes,
got a
sir.
bunch of people we've got to get through.
Yeah, understood. Thank you, sir. I'll make just one quick point, sir. There are currently 500,000 kids, 500,000 kids in the state of Georgia who attend a school that is graded either a D or F by GOSA. And that's, there are also, as Senator Setzler pointed out, any kid can take advantage of this. But those are the kids that need our help, and they need our help, and they need this bill. So I'd ask the committee to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Cindy Battles, if she's in the room. And then our next person on deck's Holly Terry, if she's in the room.
Thank you, committee. My name is Cindy Battles. I am with the People's Agenda. I know I have 1 minute to say everything that needs to be said. So the Senate Study Committee spent all summer, fall, and part of winter going all across the state listening to teachers tell you about how their schools are underfunded. In Chatham County, you heard stories about how teachers don't have enough desks for students. My son would be one that would be impacted by bills like this because his program that he was in was cut because they didn't have enough funding. I'm going to ask y'all, yes, y'all are very familiar with these bills. You pass one every single session. I'm going to ask y'all to stop defunding public education and give all of these kids a chance, because if our schools are failing, it's because they don't have the resources they need to get whatever A grade you're hoping that they get. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Holly Terry, and I am a product of school choice. I don't know that I would be standing in front of you today, a child from the inner city of Cleveland, Ohio, in a failing school system, if I wasn't given the opportunity to access school choice vouchers. And it changed the trajectory of my life. I have 4 children, 2 of which that I am very pleased with the education that they're receiving in public schools. But I have 2 that need something different. Education is not a one-size-fits-all model. And I walk these halls every session, and I listen to lawmakers and legislation in regards to bullying and mental health and reading and all of these things. And while we're over here nitpicking and going back and forth, our children are falling on that sword year after year after year. Some of these kids are highly at risk, and I have 2 of them, and we need to provide immediate access, an immediate road for children to be able to access a quality education that is most conducive to their learning environment. I am so thankful that I had that opportunity, and I am praying and hoping and believing that Georgia will step up to the plate and do what is best for every single student. To be pro-school choice does not mean you're anti-public schools. There is space for all. And just a side remark, the more we have tons of empirical data to support the fact that we keep investing and throwing more and more money at our public school systems with the same return. I implore you all to look at the return that comes from school choice. Thank you.
Our next speaker's Molly Guerrera, if I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm not. There we go. Thank you. And then Lisa Morgan is up next.
Senators, thank you for your time today. My name is Molly Garreau. I'm the mother of 8 children. My 5th child, Megan, was born with multiple special needs. We have been having a good experience with her so far in her elementary public school. However, she's due to transition to 6th grade, which, as we all know, is a big transition into middle school. Just to give you an idea, Megan is one of what we call a complex gray area special needs child. Not one size fits all. She doesn't fit in any sort of classroom and needs a lot of accommodations. She's academically needing to be in a typical classroom for social emotional, but medically she's very complex. And as we had our IEP meeting, we realized the public school, middle schools cannot serve her. She needs a resting place. She cannot do that because by the time she rests in one class, they've moved to the next one. She has G-tube feeds. She has other issues that are going on with her that they cannot meet in a typical classroom setting, which is where she needs to be. So what can we do, we ask? We have some options for her, and she would be best suited in a hybrid option because it meets both her academic needs and her medical needs. This bill would greatly help us with that because we could apply those funds, as you've heard, to not just the hybrid tuition, but hiring a special ed tutor, a nurse, curriculum that works for her. And this is something that kids like my child, Megan, need. We support both public and private schools, but the key, like you've heard, is that one size does not fit all. As time goes, these kids' needs change, and it's important that we allow parents, although well-intentioned, teachers, legislators, parents are the only ones who can decide truly what the quality and best situation is for their child, and in this case, Megan needs to not, unfortunately, continue in public school, but it leaves us with little options without bills like 233 to give us those options.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And then Kathy Statham is on deck.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the time to speak. I am Lisa Morgan. I am a kindergarten teacher and the president of the Georgia Association of Educators. And I'm here speaking to you on behalf of the 1.75 million students in our public schools. As the previous speaker said, the Senate Committee on Education Funding Mechanisms spent 1 year studying the issue of education funding. And one of the grave issues that was brought was that we need a QBE funding addition for students who live in poverty. I've heard about failing schools today. Those failing schools are almost always in areas where our children are dealing with poverty. We must fund our public schools first and not continue to take resources away from our children whose only chance at a public education is in our public schools. Their only chance for an education is in our public schools. $6,000 is less than half of the average private school tuition in this state. So my students, who are 100% free and reduced lunch, who are unable to come to school without school bus transportation, and who are unable to remain after school for tutorial without school bus transportation home, in no reality would this, quote, scholarship provide them an opportunity to attend any school other than our public schools. We
Thank you
have a
so much.
duty
Thank
to
you.
all our children.
Thank you for your comments. Next on deck would be Amanda McGee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I have a prepared statement that I wrote, and I'd like to read it. It is easy enough to implement a verification system in this bill to ensure illegal aliens, no matter how you address them or what you call them, do not have access to state funds and have authority over dispersal of taxpayer dollars. Biden has made a mockery of our immigration laws. We are watching to see if legislature will follow along in the name of school choice. I favor school choice. I am not opposed to school choice. I am opposed to the language that allows illegals to obtain this money. And I was accosted by a parent prior that's present in this room who said to me, "Why are you trying to hurt our children? You want to throw my children out with the bathwater. We already give illegals money, so we should give my child money." That's the point. How many carrots are we going to dangle so that more people come to Georgia illegally to get money that my taxpayers' money pays? So I'm 100% for school choice. I do not like this legislation, and I want you to amend it with the language so that United States citizens, students, can get the money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Taylor Hawkins is on deck, if you're in the room.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda McGee, and I'm a parent. I want to thank Senator Dalzell and all of you who support this bill. We really appreciate it. We want our children to have a better education. As far as the illegal immigrants, our children are American citizens, and we need to think of them first. They need to come first. We need to see the actual statistics and data when they're talking about illegal immigrants. Our children are suffering in some of these schools. As the teacher pointed out, a lot of these schools are failing, but our kids deserve a chance. No matter what their skin color is, no matter what their zip code is, our kids deserve a chance to have a $6,000 education savings account. All the data shows all over the country that this is doing great. The numbers look really good for Black children, white children, Hispanic children, Asian children. Everyone is doing a lot better in environments and schools that have school choice. And my son Gabriel would like to say a few words as well.
I think this bill is important for us kids because it boosts and improves our education for the better.
Thank you so much for that comment. Very well said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the work that Senator Dolezal has done on this bill. I want to mention 4 quick facts. I know you've heard some passion. Appreciate the passion on the issue. 4 quick facts. Number 1 is the impact on public schools. In a meta-study, a study of studies, 26 different studies examining the effects of school choice on public schools, 24 found a net positive impact on those schools. Just to cut past some of the ideological verbiage you've heard today and get back to the facts. Reduced crime. This is a very interesting point that I found when researching this bill. Harvard and Princeton, a study by both of them found that accessing school choice options in New York City reduced the likelihood of incarceration by male students by 100%. Got 5 more studies like that I can show you as well if you're interested offline. Number 3, this is incredibly positive for low-income areas. In Florida, as school choice programs expanded, they improved low-income student education from 33rd worst in the nation to number 1 over the course of 15 years. That's in just 15 years. They went from one of the lowest to the very top. And number 4, the people want it. In a 2022 poll of Georgia voters, 87% of respondents agreed it is time to put students ahead of educational systems when funding education. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. All right, thank you. I know the audience is not going to like this, but we are under some extreme time constraints that we're going to end the public comment now. We're going to hear back from the bill author. If you'd like to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't belabor the point. I think that everybody who spoke today, regardless of the issue, they do have the best interests of the children in mind. The beauty of federalism, though, is that we get to look to other states and see what they do. And what we see when we look at other states is where programs like this have been implemented. It has lifted the outcomes for not only those whose parents decided to seek an educational opportunity for them outside of the public school, but it has actually lifted outcomes, and the previous speaker spoke to this, to those who remained in the public school system. The marginal cost that I mentioned before is likely the reason for that. I appreciate every member of this committee and your favorable consideration of the bill.
Thank you very much. Any comments for the presenter? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to pass LC 491388S. By substitute.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I just want to vote for the heck of it. But thank you for pointing that out. All opposed? So motion passes 6-5. Which one did you want? Which one did you want? Whatever you want. We're good. Okay. Well, I lost my sheet. Where did it go?
Rachel.
Oh, do you have the schedule of the last 2?
Yeah.
I've got all the stuff mixed up here now. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to decide here.
204 or 208.
Which one do you think somebody did? Okay. All right, now we're going to move on to SB 204. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I bring before you and us today Senate Bill 204. For those of you that were on the committee last year, you probably remember Senator Tippins introducing a bill that addressed some of the accreditation processes in our school system. And while the senator and I tended to diverge quite a bit on education issues especially, I am resurrecting this bill in his honor. And essentially what we do in this bill is we limit the considerations for school accreditation, and I'll point you to the lines here. On lines 61 through 62, to the quality of learning and teaching in public schools or school systems. And what we put a floor in at the consideration for this at 65%, and that we allow the State Board of Education in collaboration with educational professionals to increase that if they'd like to. The second consideration that these accreditation agencies would be allowed to consider is on line 69, which is the financial efficiency of the system. Obviously, at most, that could have a 35% impact, and it would be less if the State Board of Education decided differently, which sounds 73 as well. One of the things I know that was a passion of Senator Tippins when he presented this bill is on lines 106 through 108, and that is essentially states that those who diagnose your problem cannot profit off of finding you the cure. So we've actually worked with the largest accrediting agency in the state to come up with the language that we agree to here, which is that essentially they cannot charge an additional fee to address any issues that are found during the process of accreditation. Because one of the concerns that came, I believe this may have even been from Cobb County that Senator Tippins spoke about, was that he believed that problems were being diagnosed and then an offer of remedy for that problem for a fee was offered by the same agency. So we have addressed that in this bill as well. Mr. Chairman, I think that I've worked with Jay Morgan on this, who represents the largest accrediting agency in the state. We've come to agreement on this bill as it sits before you today. I believe there's a gentleman here from Cobb County Schools who may want to speak to this as well, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the committee? All right, we'll have the gentleman coming up for the Cobb County Schools, if you'd like to speak.
Committee, John Floresta, Chief Strategy and Accountability Officer with the Cobb County School District. It's a pleasure to see you, and we proudly support this piece of legislation as an opportunity for real accountability. I think you see that in the second or third line of the bill, where references accountability, and we know that's a big word which is thrown around often in this space. The idea of dual accountability is something we run into often as a public school system. How do we align our students and our staff to make decisions that are not only good for kids, but that follow the law, follow state policy, follow local policy? And we think this bill clarifies some points that have currently incentivized us towards a dual accountability path. Currently, when state policy and state law are in conflict with accreditation standards, it leaves us as local school districts in a place of confusion. Obviously, we're going to follow the law. Obviously, we're going to do what's good for kids. We're also going to follow local board policy. And what do we do when those things come in conflict? This bill clarifies some of that, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with the senator and make decisions that are more in line with the accountability system that's been established by the state, and we think this bill does that.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or questions from the committee? Mr. Chairman, would you like to close?
No, ma'am.
Oh, you do?
Senator James asked a question. This was Senator Tippins' bill originally. We voted this on committee last year. It's good. It's a good memory. It's a good memory. Your microphone's not on, I don't think, but I did hear you.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like a motion to do pass. LC 491390S.
I'll just talk about the gentleman from 37. I'd like to make the motion. I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? Motion passes. Motion passes 6-2. All right, what we'll do, we're under 10 minutes left, and then we'll lose this room to regulated industry. So what we'll do is SB 208, it will be our first bill to be heard tomorrow morning. We've got a committee meeting at 10 a.m. It should be in this room in 450. So folks that came today, I apologize that you came down here and are going to have to come back tomorrow. Just very busy time right now as we approach crossover. Hope you all have a good evening, and we are adjourned. Thank you.